thank you so much for being here today, Dr. Rob. We really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us.
Yeah, thank you so much. We really appreciate it.
Well, thank you for inviting me to this forum.
And so Dr. Rob is a doctor, and he has actually survived cancer. And he has experienced a lot of the side effects of toxins in his body. And he has created a different way of healing the body and how dealing with cancer and other toxins exposure that he has been dealing with. So how did you start with looking into toxins as a source of problems in your health?
In my own health, it took a while. First, understanding the idea of environmental toxins really takes a while to kind of integrate that as a concept. We start with perhaps smoking or now vaping. We think, oh, well, that's going to affect my lungs or my airway, but you limit your consciousness to that one specific thing, right? You don't think about the entire environment. For me, I started thinking about environmental toxins as being a contributor to disease in myself and my friends when many of us in our 30s developed cancer, some of us in our 20s. I had 15 friends in a class of 300 that developed cancer by the time we were in our 30s. And I grew up in a pretty affluent town in northern New Jersey, which was very close to Newark, New Jersey, and Elizabeth, where there was a lot of industrial chemicals and manufacturing. We didn't know what was causing. People there think it's normal, but I've since moved and I've lived in other places where people aren't sick like that, and it's not normal. My friends from home, 3 of my 4 best friends from home, their parents developed neurodegenerative diseases very early on in life and cancers, and they died before their 70s. So again, it's not something there that people really think is abnormal, but having gotten perspective from living other places, I've realized it's definitely abnormal. Now, we didn't know what was causing it, whether there was something in the groundwater or the air or the environment in general that was causing people to get sick, but I started thinking in that term, in terms of the environment. As a radiologist, I was working up in another hospital in northern New Jersey at one point in my career, and I was doing ultrasound one day in this big hospital. And every day I would see at least 3 or 4 women come in with spontaneous abortions, miscarriages. And in my practices in other parts of the country, I would see maybe 1 case of a miscarriage every 2 or 3 or even 4 weeks. It shouldn't happen every day. But in this one particular hospital, I was seeing multiple cases every day. And I was so disturbed by it that I went to the risk manager for the hospital and I said, something's going on in this community. These women are all coming in with miscarriages. And she said, oh, well, that's normal for us. I guess I talked to the ultrasound tech first and she said it was normal for them, that volume of miscarriages was normal. I said, this is not normal. This is not normal for anywhere. And I went to the risk manager for the hospital and she didn't know anything about it. And she said, well, gee, maybe it had something to do with the fact that we had a toxic effluent come into our community pool last summer. We had to close the pool. So there again, there was something in the environment in the community that made people sick. And in this case, one of the observable effects was that these women lost their pregnancies. What other effects happened, I don't know. But this was another kind of key to the idea that there are environmental toxins that we're being exposed to that are making us sick that we may not be able to, pinpoint and localize. It's very difficult. Since then, I've had many other examples in my career and elsewhere that I've seen people getting sick from things that I could pinpoint. If I could tell you one more example if you're interested.
Absolutely, yeah.
So I had a relative who developed hyperthyroidism, and that's a very common diagnosis now. People have overactive thyroids, and the treatment is to either irradiate the thyroid gland and to kill it, or to remove it with surgery, which is kind of a risky surgery. And then you have to live on a pill called Synthroid for the rest of your life. If you have either of those procedures, that's the treatment. So a close relative of mine, my sister, was diagnosed with hyperthyroidism, and the doctor gave her those two options for treatment. And I said, no, 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 don't do that. Just wait and let's see what happens. So she waited a couple of months, went back to the doctor, still hyperthyroid, gave her the options again. And it just kind of hit me, and I thought, where's your Wi-Fi router? Is it in your bedroom? And she said, yes, it is. And I said, I want you to take it out of your bedroom and move it downstairs into the basement. So she did that. And she said, what else? I said, that's it. So I said, let's see what happens. Next time she went to her doctor, a few months later, her thyroid was normal.
No kidding.
It was normal ever since. It's been normal ever since. She never had any treatment.
Wow.
And so that was an example where the irritation from the chronic EMF exposure from the Wi-Fi router was bombarding her body in general, but also the thyroid gland specifically, and causing it to overreact. Wow. And a simple modification that she never would have thought of otherwise spared her surgery.
Wow. We've heard a lot about EMF exposure, and that's actually one of the first actual case studies that I've ever heard somebody share. I mean, it's kind of like tobacco in the early stages. I talk about this a lot too. It's like, oh, it might not be good, and then they put warning labels, and then decades later, all of this stuff happens. That's the first time I've actually seen or heard about somebody really like, okay, before and after EMF, because there's all of these things that we're talking about in the home, and toxins, because it's cumulative, because it's generally invisible. It's really hard, as you said, to pinpoint this stuff.
Right.
That's wild.
Well, a skeptic could say, oh, well, you have to do a double-blind control study, and that's not proof. It's just an anecdotal story.
Sure.
And that is true. It's just an anecdotal story, but there's a lot of scientific research out there now, and the research base is growing around the world regarding EMF and the toxicity associated with it. At the same time, 5G is coming around the corner, and they're trying to implement that into our neighborhoods, and that's going to be devastating to human health.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's not something that we're aware of, like the side effects. We just think it's going to be great because it's going to make our life so much easier, since we're so busy and we need things on the on the snap of our fingers, and but we're not looking deep into what actually the side effects of it. And also, that's a new technology. It's something new that we haven't really developed to understand the effects in our body. Now, you as a radiologist, for how long have you been a radiologist for?
24 years.
And in all this time, have you seen the diagnosis getting a little bit more frequent, or, the difference in the diagnosis from 25 years ago and the past 5 years and now?
And maybe as far as frequency of ailments or certain types of ailments that are more prevalent now, maybe?
I'll tell you one example that it seems to be all over the country, at least in this country, and that's the diagnosis of gluten sensitivity and celiac disease.
Mm-hmm.
And when I first started my imaging career, we had a teaching file in my training program, and there was one case of celiac disease in the teaching file. And everybody shared that case around the country. And if you took your board exam and they showed you a case of celiac disease, it was the same case that everybody had in their teaching file, because nobody had a case of celiac disease. It was not a diagnosis that people were making. But early in the 2000s, I believe it was, I saw my first case of real celiac disease, at least that I diagnosed. And then I saw another case, and then I saw another case, and then I saw another case. Now it's so common that the doctors don't even order imaging studies for it anymore. They make the diagnosis based on history. So what happened? Well, we've learned about the microbiome in the gut, which is a bunch of bacteria and fungi and other life forms living on our gut lumen, on the lining of our gut. They are part of us, and they get killed off when we have antibiotics. They also get killed off when we ingest glyphosate, which is the chemical used in Roundup and some other herbicides. So when we ingest food that's tainted with Roundup, we're killing off parts of our microbiome. The more you eat, the more you kill off. And I think that that is what's causing the celiac disease problem. Now, I had a patient who had the diagnosis of celiac disease, and I recommended get off all GMO foods, try to have it as much organic as possible and clean off your fruit and your vegetables with a good cleanser, either a homemade vinegar wash or one of these fruit and vegetable sprays that they sell in the supermarket to make sure you don't ingest any of these chemicals that they put on the fruit to preserve it or to, antifungals or um, any of the sprays that they put in even in organic fruit. And I told them to start drinking some kefir because kefir has a lot of probiotics in it, and their symptoms improved, and that was the end of their celiac disease. So this is another diagnosis that I'm not quite sure we need to have.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's related to environmental toxins and in particular the food supply.
Yeah. What about, so you're talking about ingestion. What about just exposure when you spray things in the air or it's in the air and you can't see it?
So yeah, when we interact with our environment, we do so really with in three different ways, or actually four ways. I'd say now we're including EMF. We inhale things through our respiratory system. We ingest things through our mouth, and they get absorbed by our system. Or we come into contact with things via our skin. Things that are in the air can either be ingested, they can be inhaled, or they can come into contact with the skin. So you can be affected by some toxin in the air by any of those mechanisms. Most commonly, of course, would be the respiratory system. We think of air pollution mainly as particulates. We think, there's smog in the air, there's particulates floating in the air. I'm going to get an air cleaner with a high MERV value to take all the particulates out of the air, and my air is going to be clean. Unfortunately, there's another type of air pollution that has to do with the volatile organic compounds that are being emitted from everything from our cosmetics and our furniture and glues and adhesives and paints and lacquers and carpeting, and everything that we put in our homes can off-gas. And this off-gassing can then be inhaled, and it enters into the bloodstream, and it can affect our metabolism.
Yeah, absolutely. And we talked a little bit about this when we first met. Can you remind me or talk about some of the things that you've seen and implemented in your own home, maybe around air, and how are you keeping all those toxins at bay in your own house?
One of them, I do have a good air handler, so I get the most powerful pleated filter for the HVAC system that I can. So that now they have, you can't really get a HEPA filter on your HVAC system unless you have a specialized motor, because the fenestrations in the filter are so small that you really need a special filter. But they have a high MERV value. That's MERV for anybody that wanted to write that down. A high MERV value will filter out most of the pollutants and toxins in your air that are particulates. In my own experience, this really became an issue for me when I was painting my living room. I didn't realize it at the time, and I was working on the chapter in my book about air, which is funny. I kind of manifested this experience, but I was painting my living room, and within a couple of days, I started developing nosebleeds, which were unusual for me. And they started getting worse and worse and worse until one night I was out to dinner with my neighbors, and I was actually hemorrhaging out of my nostrils at dinner. It was very embarrassing, and it was also scary
Sure.
because I couldn't get it to stop. So I ended up in the emergency room, and they packed up my nose, and they looked up there with a scope, and the doctor said, looks like the mucosa is friable, meaning that it's all ulcerated, and it was abnormal looking, but he didn't see any specific cause of bleeding. But he wanted me to follow up with an ENT, an ear, nose, and throat doctor, and have them look up my nose and make sure that he wasn't missing a tumor. And I said to him, do you think this could have anything to do with the fact that I just painted my living room? And he looked at me like I had two heads, and he said, why? Like, what? How would that have anything to do with it? And I said, well, the VOCs. And this was an academic hospital, or a satellite of an academic hospital in my town. So should have had people that were on top of these kinds of things, I would have thought. But no, physicians don't know anything about environmental medicine. He looked at me like I was wearing two heads. At the same time I was talking to him, I thought that's exactly what it was. It was the VOCs from the paint. So I went home, I turned on fans, I opened up all the windows, and I slept in the basement, which was far away from where I had painted the living room, and the bleeding stopped, and that was the end of it.
Wow.
But that was an example of how these, and it was interesting because I wrote a blog about this, and afterwards I got responses from many people who had had similar experiences with VOCs, that it caused nosebleeds. And my concern, what I expressed, is that that's what you can see. That's the effect that you can see. What about the effects that you can't see? What are these VOCs doing once they're absorbed into your bloodstream and they're going to target organs and they're doing whatever they do, and you can't see those. So it's really important to limit your VOC exposure. Now, there was an article about NASA doing this experiment with plants, and the plants were absorbing VOCs through their roots and their leaves and cleaning the air. And there's been a lot of blogs since about the value of plants. Interestingly, now they're coming out with some articles saying, well, they're not removing as many VOCs as you think they are. It's not as good, but I'm starting to think maybe that's some disinformation, because I do think it helps.
Yeah, but at what volume? You would maybe need the equivalent of a small rainforest in your house, maybe. We actually got some of those air cleaning plants too, and we have a lot of meters in the house measuring this, and they're definitely not adding more oxygen, and I don't see any difference with the VOCs. And then the other potential is, if you don't water them properly or have the right container, then you could also have water damage issues too. So yeah, there's always these pros and cons of everything, right?
Right, it's true, yeah. So, I think as long as you have your air, as long as you have some infiltration of fresh air coming into your home periodically, that should clear it out. And I think plants do help, even if it's just a little bit. It's better than nothing.
Yeah. And they also look good.
Yeah,
they look good. They do. Yeah, absolutely.
It's probably the safest type of decoration. As you get deeper into this, you realize, my goodness, I can't have anything in my house. The carpeting is bad. The glue that I put my wood down with is bad. Paint is giving me nosebleeds. And yeah, what is it doing over 10, 15, 20 years, breathing that every day when we've tightened up our homes and we're basically living in a big plastic bag? Yeah.
Well, it is, there's a wave that, initially there's an off-gassing that's much more intense than, say, a year or two down the road. Mm-hmm. So there is something coming off a couple of years down the road, but certainly after a couple of weeks of manufacturing or painting, that's when it's the worst.
Yeah.
What about children? Have you seen a lot of decrease in health with children that have been exposed to environmental toxins?
Oh my goodness, yeah. Well, I have two children, and my children are pretty healthy, I'm happy to say, but their friends aren't. And my daughter was telling me just the other day that all of her friends are depressed, they're on medications, they're not well, and she doesn't understand why. And I say to them, oh, well, maybe if they decrease their screen time, tell them to take off, stop talking on the phone. And they talk like this on the phone, where they're being exposed to the EMF, but even just looking at an LED, at the screen and having that
Blue
affect
light.
them. It's that light. It affects the mood. It affects everything. So yeah, the kids they're getting bombarded, and there's digestive problems and ADHD, and there's so many things going on with the children now. It's terrible, and it is multifactorial.
Mhm.
So again, it's hard to pinpoint, but with all of this, you have to start somewhere. You can't just say, oh, well, this is a fruitless task. There's no way that I can deal with this. I just have to give up and just become a victim to it all. I don't believe that. I believe it requires education, and it requires some discipline and organization. So if you tackle one thing at a time and you say, okay, you know what, we're going to clean up the air in this house, and you start reading about it and you start learning about it, and then all of a sudden a light bulb goes on in your head and you think, gee, I'm going to make a different choice next time when I have to whatever, and I'm going to go for the healthier option, or I'm going to do this differently now that I know what I know. So it's not that you're following rules or a series of steps. You really have to increase your consciousness. You have to increase your awareness and and become educated in each of these subsections of your environmental the environment in your house.
Yeah, that's kind of what happened to me when I first got exposed to, the idea of having toxins. I became overwhelmed because then to me, it's like, what am I going to do? I'm going to throw everything away. I'm going to throw all my makeup away, my mattress. I had just spent almost $10,000 in my mattress. Am I going to throw that away? So how much is going to cost me to get that lifestyle? And, researching, one person says one thing, another person says one thing. And I love what you said about just take small steps towards it. Start making educated decisions and choices. And we do have a lot of companies now that are making safer products that's easier for us to find even in the local market, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So in terms of being like, how do you do when you go out, like when you have to go out of town? Do you bring that habit with you as well?
I don't, except for the water. I do bring, I try to bring, I have a portable water filter that I try to bring with me when I go on vacation. But I find traveling very difficult. It's very difficult. I do have a portable air filter, but I don't usually bring it. There's a lot of EMF now in hotel rooms, which is very disturbing to the sleep. I do not sleep well when I'm traveling. And it's depressing because I think, gee, what's happening? Where can you go now that you can get a good night's sleep if you're not at your own home? Or if you're camping, of course, is a wonderful option. But it used to be that if you could go to a nice hotel room and you could enjoy a luxurious, bed and a spa-like bathroom, and you would, a big TV in the wall, and you could have a great time and you get a good night's sleep. But now you're being bombarded with EMF. Not only that, there's like lights in the room for the smoke detector and the carbon dioxide monitor, and there's like little lights on different things in the room. And so if you don't bring blindfolds, you can't get darkness, which you really need to produce melatonin. To get a good night's sleep, you really need to produce melatonin. That helps your immune system. It's very, very important. And so if you're not getting darkness when you sleep, that's also compromising your health. That's another thing I do bring with me. I bring earplugs, and I bring a sleep mask.
Yeah,
Just
for
to
us,
help.
yeah, for us it's the same. It's like, and we bring, we used to bring all of those like 20,000 bottles of, water. And now we also have our portable water filtration system that, attached to the sink, super simple. You get water, fresh water, clean water all the time. We have our portable air filtration system. So we'd rather bring that than bringing clothes
Yeah,
and a bunch of stuff.
Well, what I will say to your audience is that the longer that you're exposed to a healthy environment at home, the more resilience you have to a toxic environment.
Mm-hmm.
So if you are basically healthy and you are living in a healthy environment, and then you're going to travel for a week to wherever, and you're in an environment that's toxic, you should survive without getting sick. And then you go back home and you'll detox again. So it doesn't have, there's 100 reasons why you should have a wellness home. And that's one of them. It makes you more resilient.
Mm-hmm.
So you've talked about, basically, I'll just put it all together. I was going to ask you, what are top three? So it seems like definitely something cleaning the air has helped you with what you're doing, something cleaning your water.
Yes.
And then EMF would be the other one, is limiting your exposure to it. And
Absolutely. Especially while you're sleeping. I'm sorry, yeah. Especially while you're sleeping.
Correct. Yeah.
So, and now, the newest thing is that these Wi-Fi routers that you get from the cable company, they're automatically booming out Wi-Fi as part of their deal.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you turn off, what I was doing previously is I would put that router on a timer, so it would click off when I went to sleep, and then it would click back on in the morning. But the cable company is updating the router, constantly at night, and then it comes back on and it doesn't work properly, and it's to call the cable company, and it's a real problem. But what you can do is you can disconnect the Wi-Fi function of the router by going to their website. At least
Yes.
my Comcast will do that. And then you can buy a separate Wi-Fi router that can plug into their router, and then put that one on the timer. So that way you're not getting EMF while you're sleeping, but your connection to Comcast or whatever company you're using doesn't get disconnected.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I love everything you said, and we have seen our health improving by taking those steps, even by just opening the windows, which to me, I would, that was not something I used to do. So
Right.
changing the habits, I think it's huge. Understanding where toxins are coming and changing your habits in a way that it's not hard, and as you say, take one step at a time. I think that's great. And you mentioned that you have a lot of those steps in your book. Is that right?
Yes, I divided the book up into chapters that cover each part of the environment. So I have I have a chapter on food, a chapter on light, a chapter on water, a chapter on sound. Every part of the environment I wrote a chapter on, just to give people some background and some information to help them then explore further, and help them make some decisions about how to make a healthier environment at the house. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for your time and for all the information you shared with us. And you have a special gift for our audience, right?
Yeah, so if they go to my website, there's a link now that I put up. You can click on it and you'll get the first chapter of the book for free. It's a free PDF file that'll be emailed to you. And so, yeah, so anybody can come to the website. It's robbrownmd.com. I've got blogs on there, and I'm going to be posting some updates. I'm going to be doing an EMF series soon. I'm working on it currently. But if they're interested in taking a look at the book, the first chapter will be for free.
Okay. Thank you so much. I appreciate your time.
Thank you.
That's very valuable for the folks listening. You've confirmed everything that's been working for us. So definitely helps us, and hopefully everybody listening will be able to catch some of these too and start implementing, kind of as you said, it's really just changing simple habits one at a time and building up that resilience and the life that we have. And then you can go on a toxic vacation and you'll be okay.
That's right.
Thank you, Dr. Rob.
Thank you.
So
Thank you for
much.
what you're doing. It's awesome. Terrific.
You too. Thanks.